Hey guys, it's our second day of remote learning. Today's focus is going to be on histograms and frequency tables. So this is also something that we covered briefly last week, but we're going to go into it some more today just to make sure that we're all clear on how to work with these. And so just follow along. And of course, remember, if you have any questions, there's a form on the blog that you can enter your questions on. So you can submit me any questions on that form, or you can also send me an email. And if it's during my office hours of 10:30 to 12, then I should respond back pretty quickly. If it's after that time, I'll try to get back with you as soon as I can, but it definitely won't be any later than the next morning. So here we go. To start, I need you guys on MSG page 12B. Okay, so on MSG page 12B, this is discussing frequency tables. So remember, a frequency table displays data that has been collected. Typically, a frequency table is used as we actually would collect data. So if you were conducting a survey, you might collect that data in a frequency table. So instead of just questioning people and writing their responses down in some random order, a frequency table would just help you to organize that data as you collect it, so that when you're done collecting your data, it's easier to organize. Okay, so we have two different frequency tables here. The first frequency table is about soccer scores from a season. And as you can see, it's saying that the scores were 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This one tally mark right here shows that one point was scored one time. 2 points was the score one time. 3 points were scored in 3 different games. 4 points were scored in just one game. And then there were 1, 2, 3, 4 games where the score was 5 points. Okay, so again, each of these frequencies represents one total game. So if I were to ask you how many games had 4 points, right here, you would look at that. There's one game where there were 4 points scored. Okay. Below is another frequency table, but the difference between these, as you can see, is that right here, the data is all separate. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Down here, the data is grouped into what we call intervals. Intervals are groups of numbers or groups of data. So instead of, as you can see, this goes from 0 to 19. So instead of having to list out all the numbers between 0 and 19, it's just grouped into intervals to, I guess, make that easier to collect. All right, so the way you would read this, and this is about the number of cups of coffee. So it's saying that there are, let's say, 2 people who have between 0 and 3 cups of coffee. There are 3 people who have between 4 and 7 cups of coffee. 8 people who have between 8 and 11 cups of coffee. That's a lot of coffee, y'all. I'm assuming this is like within a month, maybe, or a week. I don't know. 3 people had between 12 and 15 cups of coffee, and 2 people had between 16 and 19 cups of coffee. All right, now there's 3 things that have to be true about your intervals. So anytime you're grouping numbers together and creating intervals like this, one thing that has to be true is the intervals must be equal. Okay. What I mean by that is we have to have the same number of numbers in each interval. So right here, if I have 0 through 3, that's 0, 1, 2, 3. That's 4 numbers. And then 4 through 7, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 4 numbers. 8 through 11, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's also 4 numbers. So you can see that these intervals are equal because they all contain the same number of data. Another thing that has to be true is intervals must be non-overlapping, which of course means non means not, so they cannot overlap. So in other words, if this interval stops at 3, the next one would need to start at 4. I can't include 3 again because then those two intervals would overlap, and that would be a problem because then you're basically counting the number 3 two different places or 2 different times. All right, and then the other thing that must be true is intervals must be able to contain all of the data. Okay. So let's look at some examples down here at the bottom under where it says you try. Okay, and let's say that, in fact, when I wrote this problem, it was based on ages of people in my family, and they went from ages 2 to 38. And so if my data went as low as 2 and as high as 38, let's think of some possible intervals that we could use to display that data. So if I look at this first set of intervals right here, I'll get a phone call. Okay, so back to where I was. All right, so if our data is from 2 to 38, the first set of intervals here, I have 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, and 31 through 40. This would work because it meets all of these requirements here. It contains all the data between 2 and 38, okay? It also, they're equal intervals, and the easiest way to see if they're equal is to look at the second number in each interval. And I've got 10, 20, 30, 40. So I can see that they're counting by tens. Also, I see that they're non-overlapping because I have 1 through 10, then I start at 11 to 20, 20 to 21. So there's no overlapping there. Okay, next, number 2 is not going to work. And the reason is because they do overlap, okay? I have 10 here and then I have 10 here. And again, the reason that's a problem is because if I have the number 10, I'm counting it 2 different places. So the second set does not work. The third set does not work because they're clearly not equal, right? This goes through 10, 15, 35, 40. So those intervals are like jumping all over the place. They're not equal at all, so that set of intervals will not work. This fourth one, the intervals are equal, and I can see that again by looking at the second number in each interval. 8, 16, 24, 32, 40. I'm counting by 8, so I can see those intervals are equal. They don't overlap, and it contains all the data from 2 to 38, so this set of intervals would be good to use. Number 5 will not work, and that's because of the third requirement here. It does not contain all of the data. If you notice, it stops at 30, but it said our data goes up to 38, so I can't stop it and not include all the data, so that last set will not work. Okay, so that was frequency tables. Next, we're going to look at histograms. And frequency tables and histograms are kind of linked because often you would want to make a frequency table of your data before creating your histogram. It just makes it a little bit easier to do. All right, so let's look at page 13A. And this is talking about histograms. And a histogram is a type of bar graph, which makes sense, right? It looks just like a bar graph. It is a type of bar graph, but in the past, you may have done bar graphs where you ask people like, okay, what's your favorite pet, or what's your favorite singer, or your favorite food, or pizza topping, or whatever. But the difference here is that a histogram uses numerical data. In other words, it's number data. So it wouldn't be categorical data like a thing, a person, an animal. It's going to be number data. And it has to be grouped in intervals, which we were just discussing. So for the example on page 13A, you have the ages of people who attended a movie, all right? And you can see right here on the y-axis is your frequency, okay? The x-axis is the ages, and they're grouped into intervals. So what this is saying is that there were, say, 3 people aged 0 through 9 who attended the movie. Or there were, say, 4 people from 10 to 19. And anytime I'm doing these type of problems, what I always start with is I would put the number above each bar, just because I don't have to go back and redo that every time I'm trying to answer another question. So I see 0 through 9 is 3. Then I have 4, 6, 8. Notice right here, there's a gap in our data. That's 0. You can put that or you can leave it blank. 1 and 2. All right, so from there, let's answer the questions. I want you to pause for a moment and see if you can answer the questions below based on that histogram, and then we'll come back and I'll share the answers for you. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to answer your questions. Go ahead and check your answers here. Let's see, let me focus out a little better. All right, just a couple of comments real quick. Sometimes people get confused. Let's see here. When it says like on number 2, how many people age 50 or over? 50 or over, when I find 50 up here on the histogram, that's right here, okay? But 50 or over is gonna be not just this bar, but it's also these people too, because 60 to 69, that's also older than 50. So I would include all of those people. So that's how we get 3 for the total number of people aged 50 or over. Also a comment on number 5, if there's a gap here, that means that there's no data. That means there were 0 people or nobody in their 40s who attended that movie. And on number 7, that's important too. On a histogram, your bars always have to touch, okay? And that's because numbers on a number line, they're continuous. And if you leave a gap in between the bars, it would look like there's a gap in the data, which would be misleading. So you want to make sure that the bars on your histogram are touching. All right, now I want you to flip on over to 14A. Now we did 14A in class last week, but I'm going to go over it again just in case you need a refresher. If you don't, obviously go ahead and skip ahead. After this, we're going to move on to page 17 and do number 2. But here we go on page 14. So page 14 is saying use the information in the frequency table to create a histogram for your data. So first of all, notice how it gives you a spot for your title. You always want to include a title on any kind of graph, because if you just have a graph with no context to it, it means nothing. You don't know, what it's about. So you have to include a title, and you need to include labels also. So the title, we're just going to use the same thing we have up here. So pages read per student last weekend. And I just skipped a word, didn't I? That's all right. Okay, so pages per student last weekend. I think that's understood. There were pages read. All right, so my y-axis is going to be the frequency. And then the x-axis is going to be the number of pages. Okay, and this is already kind of broken down for us. So we're just going to use this frequency table here to make our histogram. So I'm going to start with my intervals, and I'm going to list those intervals across the x-axis. So I have 1 through 50, 51 to 100, 101 to 150, and 151 to 200. All right, after that, I need to figure out how high my frequency needs to go. Well, if I look at my frequency table, the highest frequency we had was 5. So that means I only need to go up to 5 on my frequency. It doesn't, I could go up a little higher, but I don't need to. And obviously I can't go lower than 5 because then I'm not including all the data. So I'm just going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to draw bars for each interval. So for 1 through 50, it shows us that the frequency was 5. So for 1 through 50, I'm going to draw a bar up to 5. Okay. For 51 to 100, I had a frequency of 2. 101 to 150 is also 2. And then 151 to 200 is at 1. Okay. Remember, bars must always touch and label both axes. That's the x-axis and the y-axis. And yes, it is spelled correctly. Axes is plural. X-axis, y-axis. Axis is singular, axes is plural. So just FYI on that. All right, so here's how you would make your histogram based on the data that we had up here in the frequency table. A couple of things I want to point out too. We've discussed shape of data. When we talked about shape, some of the things we talked about were the peak of the data. Remember we said like a peak, think about like the top of a mountain. It's the same thing with a histogram. The top right here, that's our peak. So if I asked you for the peak of this data, you would say 1 through 50. If I asked you if this was skewed, this data is skewed to the right. Because remember, a skew is like if you have basically like a tail chair data. Let's see here. If I were to draw, You can kind of see it's like there's a tail to the right. So that is skewed right. I would ask you if there's a gap, and there's no gap in the data. I can also ask you about an outlier. If I had specific data points, I might consider one of these an outlier, but the way that this is shown, I'm not going to consider this, any of these to be an outlier. So let's now go ahead and take a look at page 17. All right, so 17A, problem number 2 is what I want to take a look at. All right, so the table shows the daily soda sales for a restaurant. Choose intervals, make a frequency table, and construct a histogram to represent the data. So the first thing we need to do is choose our intervals. So that's our groups of data. Like, how are we going to group it together? Is it going to be groups of 3 numbers, groups of 5, groups of 20? So if I look, what I need to find first would be my minimum or lowest, and the maximum or the highest value. So looking at all these numbers here, it looks like my lowest number that I see is, let's see, 51 looks like my lowest number. And then I need to identify my highest value. Don't see anything in the 3 digits, so it looks like it's going to be something in the 90s. Looks like my highest is 94. So if my data goes from 51 to 94, what automatically pops in my head is, well, that's about 40 numbers. So intervals of about 10 sound reasonable to me. So I'm going to group my numbers into intervals of 10. So let's see here. I think what I'll start with is let's see, to make our frequency table, I'm going to have number of sodas, the tally, and the frequency. I'll have to remember next time to give you guys more space for this. Okay, so then for, let's see, zoom in there. All right, so the number of sodas, that's where I'm going to put, let's see, the intervals. So we said groups of 10. So let's start with, say, 50 to 59. Okay. And then after, to make it non-overlapping, if I end with 59, my next one has to start at 60. So 60 through 69. Then I'll have 70 through 79, 80 through 89, and 90 through 99. Okay. Okay. All right, so from here, we're going to go through and basically see how many we have that fall into each interval. So I'm going to go through and make a tally for each value that I see. So I'm going to start with 56, that would go here, 86, that's here, 74, 63 would be here. Notice I'm just going across the row, 51, 94, 86. I'm going to pause it for a moment and finish that part. Okay, so here are all the frequencies I have when I went through and put a tally mark for each number that I had here. Okay, so again, I just went through the numbers that I was given and I put a tally mark for each number in the interval within which it fell. All right, then my frequency is where I'm going to just count up how many tallies I have. So I have 3 for 50 to 59, 1 for 60 to 69, then 8 for 70 to 79, 8 for 80 to 89, and then 4 for 90 to 99. Okay. Now I can use this data to make my histogram. So for the histogram, let's make our X and Y axis. Okay. Make sure we label those. So my Y axis is going to be the frequency, and my X axis, this represents the number of sodas, and the number of sodas is represented with the intervals that we have. So I've got 50 to 59 and so on. So I'm going to list all of my intervals down here across the bottom. Okay. All right, then once I've got that set up, so I have my x-axis, it's labeled, I've got my intervals, then my y-axis. Before I can draw the bars to represent my data, I need to figure out how high I need to label this frequency axis. So if I notice over here, my highest frequency is 8. So I'm just going to number up to 8 right here. Now I know a lot of the ones we did in class, we numbered by 2s. And that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to number 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay. Just remember, of course, in the middle of those would be your odd numbers. So I'm going to put another line in the middle of each one to indicate 1, 3, 5, and 7. I'm just not going to label those numbers because it would get too crowded. Okay. All right, now I can draw the bars to represent each interval. So from 50 to 59, we went up to, we had 3. So I'm going to draw a bar up to 3. For 60 to 69, it goes up to 1. Okay, remember the bars must be touching. Then from 70 to 79, it goes up to 8. Same thing for 80 to 89, that also goes up to 8. And then 90 to 99 goes up to 4. Okay, so that's what our histogram should look like. Let's also include an actual title. So number of sodas sold daily. And once you've got all that, then we're finished. All right, so just a few things to keep in mind if you're looking at this. Make sure your histogram is a bar graph. The bars must touch. The data must be grouped into equal intervals, and the intervals must contain all the data and they can't overlap. Make sure that if you're creating one of these that you make it where it's neat and easy to read, because if it's messy, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of having a graph. A graph is meant to make your data neat and easy to read. And let's see here. That is about it for this. All right, so from here, your next assignment for today, make sure, is the form. Okay, so there is a form on the blog. I just want you to click on that form, fill it out so that I can make sure you guys are able to like read and understand histograms and frequency tables, okay? And I think I have a couple questions on box plots too from yesterday. And I will, let's see, tomorrow what you'll be working on is, so there will be a video posted for that also. And I'm going to try to have a live classroom option on Thursday. We'll see how that goes. I'll let you guys know ahead of time. But thanks for today. See you guys later.